Hello and welcome to Grody and Unprofessional. My name is Justin McMenamy, and my mission is to share both profitable and painful leadership lessons I have acquired over a 20-year career as a misfit in corporate America. In this episode, we are joined by a veteran naval aviator and commander, former Chief Business Improvement Officer in a Fortune 50 company, and CEO of a private equity-owned aerospace components manufacturer. If that resume elicits visions of a drill sergeant leadership style, all I can say is stick around. You're in for a treat. Steve Roehrich, welcome to Grody and Unprofessional. It is an honor to have you on the show today.
Thank you and good morning, Justin. Nice to see you.
Excellent. I always enjoy interviewing people that have demonstrated leadership skill across a wide range of environments. And you are absolutely no exception to that rule. You've served our country in the Navy as a naval aviator, seeing deployments during the Gulf Wars. You've held air wing and squadron leadership roles, and you've been a vice president and chief improvement officer at Fortune 100 companies, and you have also been a CEO of an aerospace manufacturing company. To say that you have led from the cockpit, from the flight deck, from the boardroom, and from the factory floor is no exaggeration. And so I'm excited to talk about leadership with you today. But as we get started, I actually want to tell the story of how you and I were introduced and the reason that I invited you onto the podcast. A friend of mine, a friend of yours, someone that we both know, he called me up and he said, I got a guy, his name's Steve. He goes by the call sign Roach. He was in the Navy, but that's not how I met him. He's had a huge, illustrious career, but I actually met him selling golf clubs at Dick's. I want to hear the story, Steve, of somebody with all of your leadership experience, how you chose to sell golf clubs at Dick's in this season of your life. I knew the moment I heard the story, you and I were going to get along because that is the most grody and unprofessional thing that you can do, and I love it.
Well, thanks for the nice run-up there. I guess all of that is true that you've said. And so to your point of how did I end up doing what I'm doing right now? And I'm going to add on a little bit. My wife and I were living in Charleston, South Carolina, and we had one child, a son, who was a polymath, intellectual kind of guy, undergrad, cum laude in finance from George Washington University, and then worked on a PhD in molecular biology from the Department of Defense Medical School. Very smart guy. Turned out to be diagnosed with glioblastoma, a very aggressive and deadly brain cancer. And he was living here in Washington. We were living in Charleston, South Carolina. And we said, hey, Pete, we're on our way. We'll come there to be with you. And that's how we came back to metropolitan Washington, D.C. We'd lived here before. After he passed away, here my wife and I are in an apartment in Old Town, Alexandria, lovely place. And it's like, gee, I ought to do something. Otherwise, we don't want to have any capital crimes committed. And
Sure.
People who are married for a long time will understand that. And and so I thought, well, what should I do? My Rolodex is in some ways outdated. I wasn't even certain if you use the term Rolodex anymore.
The listeners, they'll look it up.
Yeah, exactly. I tell people, look, I'm 75. I've had orthopedic doctors say, well, Roach, you don't act or look any older than 59. And of course, then I slide another check over to the top of the table to them, thank them for that nice compliment. So I had a lot of energy, and it's like, gee, what do I do? If you go the normal process of trying to go back into the workforce, at my age, it's just going to get blocked. It's just the fact of life. So I thought, you know what? I have this great hobby. I've been a golfer for 40 some years. Maybe I'll just go be a golf guy. So I walked into the Dick's Golf Galaxy and said, hey, I'd like to be a golf guy. And they kind of looked at me and said, you know what? You're hired. And I'm grateful to them for that. In fact, I've written a letter to the CEO, it's a woman, of Dick's Corporation. Dick's is a $13 billion retail business with about 1,000 stores across the country. Everyone knows Dick's and Golf Galaxy Sporting Goods. And so I went there to work. There's a lot of traffic and a lot of golfers. It's where I met our mutual friend, Eric. I've been around a lot of places. I don't advertise per se that, oh, look at what I've done or anything. I'm just there to be a golf guy and help people get introduced to the pleasures of golf because golf is so important in terms of it's a sport, it's relaxation, but it's a business tool. It's an environment where you
Sure.
do a lot of things. I've played it for a long time. I'm not that great. So I was there just to learn from the other side of the golf story. I've learned a lot. I work with a team of older guys and young, and I say young, 20, 21, 22. Plus, I'm in the store with a larger Dick's with a whole bunch of younger kids. Either they're high school juniors and high school seniors, they're college, community college, or four-year college, freshmen, sophomore, juniors. It's a great pool for me to be in because
Yeah.
I learn so much from these kids every day. They treat me well enough. I don't get too many eye rolls, but it's become a great lens for me to hear what's going on in their lives and what's important and how they view
Yeah.
society, the economy. I did teach economics at the U.S. Naval Academy, so I'm always watching from a holistic point of view what's going on. How are things operating at Dick's? Because are we seeing people come in? Are they spending money? It's a pretty good lens, and so that's how I met our mutual friend Eric, because every day I meet a lot of people every day, but every day I meet one or two very interesting people because this is the
Yeah.
nation's capital. The level of talent here in town is incredible. It's not to say you don't have talent where you live or other places in the country, but there's a concentration here that's pretty deep. And so it's a really interesting conversation some days. So I have ambassadors, a military general, and Navy flag officers. I have Fortune 500 guys, consultants who run major consulting organizations. The people I get to meet are really interesting. I realize that, hey, yeah, sure, it's a job that pays me a little bit of money. That's sort of inconsequential. For me, the main focus has become the people that I meet, their stories that I get to hear, and I get to hear about what issues they are that face and how they've tried to surmount those. It's a great, great window into what's going on.
That's what I love about the maneuver is that it could be looked at a lens as, hey, this is way beneath me, but that's not the purpose.
Yep.
It's the opportunity for you to connect with people in one lens, to build your network.
Yep.
And you went to where the people are
Correct.
to build that network.
Correct.
But also, it's not just for that purpose. It's to give back. It's to learn. It's to meet others, to mentor others.
Yep.
That's what I love about the dual purpose of it. Like you said, the cash benefit isn't the main driver.
Right. And oh, by the way, I do get a little discount on equipment, but I can only own so many clubs, as you know. And they're in the trunk of your car, and then your wife looks in, you go, oh, I've had those for years,
Yeah, right. The stickers are still on them.
That's right. And married guys listening to this will understand that play. And it is right, because I've helped these kids go to university. I've got a guy who was 32, 34 years old. He'd been a BMW repair tech, and then he worked in this golf business for 5 or 6 years. He needed a good foundation. He's going to graduate on the 19th of December as a sworn warranted officer of the U.S. Capitol Police Force. Put him in there, So there's guys like this. I'm getting ready to help a guy go in the Marine Corps. He said, I don't have any direction. I said, well, let me help you out a little bit. So there's his payback. And I've always believed in that. I mentor way too many people. Military generals and admirals are my specialty, because I say, hey, you guys, you know one thing very deep, but there's other things you don't know. And so this is my tool to do that. And so I appreciate you recognizing it for what it is.
Yeah, that's right. I love it. I'm interested, Steve, to go back. Talk to me about the journey from your youth into choosing military profession as your career.
I'm not certain it was real thought out. like a lot of guys. I grew up in very, very rural Minnesota. In fact, when I was very young, I grew up in a house without running water. And so that's a log cabin story. My mother was widowed. I remember as a 9-year-old, the welfare lady from the welfare department showing up with bags of groceries and a small check. So I can appreciate that. And my mother remarried a state trooper, and so there was a consistent paycheck. But in the day where, unlike today, where you have this commoditization of information, back in those days, boy, you were limited to what you could find out. The Encyclopedia Britannica. Think about that. Anybody very young wouldn't even know what that is. And so you were informationally starved. But somehow I got myself to college and barely graduated. And then it's like, well, what am I going to do? And I had always thought about the military. And so I just walked down to the naval officer recruiting office in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and said, what do you got? And the guy looked at me and said, how'd you like to fly? And I said, I've never been in an airplane. And he goes, not to worry, we can teach monkeys to fly. Now, that was a little bit demeaning to monkeys in my mind, but his point was we got that covered. And so
Sure.
the next thing I know, I'm on my way a couple months later to Pensacola, Florida, the birthplace of naval aviation, to become
Yes.
a naval aviator. That's how I got there. It wasn't any more
Yeah.
sophisticated than that. I am going to grant that the Navy was extremely good to me. I learned so much. I got to go around the world, as a guy growing up in the Midwest. I hadn't been anywhere. I knew Minnesota and Wisconsin and Iowa and
Yeah.
the center of the universe.
The center of the universe, really.
And so I got to go to all these countries and do very glamorous stuff. Very glamorous. I had a very glamorous life. And the Navy sent me to grad school in finance. So when I didn't fly, I became a finance guy, which I chose that because I thought that would set me up for later in life, which it did. So that's how I got there and met a lot of
Yeah.
incredible people along the way. Just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Steve, take the moment here, 100%. Appreciate your service. Thank you for committing your life to protecting freedoms and to serving in the military. It's something that I did not do. Family members of mine, grandfathers and great-grandfathers did. And so just take a moment here to thank you for
And
that.
I appreciate that. But, and this kind of goes to the point on you wanting to talk about leadership, is that men and women that serve don't really think about that, especially when you're junior, when you're younger.
Yeah.
You don't think about that at all. You're there for the fun. Let's face it, the excitement of going somewhere and your friends that you make. It's the friends around you. That's why you're there. You living in the center of the country, the American Legion and VFW posts are still important.
Yes.
Especially in small towns. They're the social hub. And you go there, and all those men and women that belong still talk about that as if it were the best thing they've ever done in their lives. And I point that out to a lot of people. If you want to talk about something that will get people's attention, they love to talk about it. If you get them alone, they'll say, I should have stayed in as a career. I find that happening over and over and over again, and how well they thought that it was such an important part of their life.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the goal of the conversation here is to talk about leadership. And so one of the questions I have is, as you made the transition from your career in the Navy into civilian life and into corporate America, how well did you feel prepared for that transition? And what was that transition from military life into corporate life in a leadership lens?
Right. Good question. And it's something, remember, I told you earlier, I mentor a lot of current active duty flag and general officers. They're defined by the roles as being leaders. Leaving the military, there's a lot of things you don't know. Well, I'll give you an example. I have a friend, an Army Chief Warrant Officer 4, a very important guy. He's an intelligence specialist, and he's getting ready to retire. And he goes, Steve, I'm lost. I have no idea what to do. The Army has told me everything I need to do, and I don't know where to even start. And I go, let's take a walk down and get a cup of coffee. My story is that the military is, and this gets to the leadership portion here, an incredible crucible, CRUCIBLE, crucible of leadership examples and preparing you for later life. Remember, I'm a guy who's not only been in the military, but then on top of a couple of Fortune 500 companies, atop of the second biggest department in the federal service. I've got a wide range, as you called it one day, multiple domain leadership. I thought that was a pretty good title. The best preparer for your life and leadership, I believe, is the military. Look, I was responsible for business improvement. In other words, you could cite underneath that leadership at Johnson & Johnson. I think the military does an exemplary job of preparing people, but they don't even know it. because they don't go out and benchmark themselves. Although now they have programs to send men and women for a 6-month or year-long stint in private industry, where then you can compare yourself to the civilian junior, mid-level, senior executives that are out there. But it's an exceptional. And why is that? Well, because from the deck plates up, you're taught how to be a leader. And you watch people, of course. So there's formal and informal learning on leadership. And that drives the question, well, what is leadership then? I spent a lot of time at Johnson & Johnson defining what leadership was. What were the attributes? Sure. What were the underlying attributes? Because if you can't define it, then how are you going to say what it is? And if you can define it, can you measure it? And can you measure it in people? And in a nice way, point out, here's some areas for improvement. Because if you can get everybody up to a certain level of leadership performance, that's going to help the whole organization and help you as a person, which is why we're having this conversation.
Where did you land? What did you see as the key attributes of leadership?
Oh, I've got lists.
You got it right there.
Yeah. I remember being at the Naval Academy's graduation, because I was on a staff, I had to be there. And a guy that I knew when he came back from Vietnam, he was then a U.S. Senator, John McCain. John McCain gave the commencement speech. It's a great speech, and he's talking about leadership, but he talks about leadership in examples. And that's how leadership was kind of taught always. There'd be stories of leadership and stories of men and women who, quote, performed, but it was only that. It was stories of that. And whether or not you could drag out from that, what were the attributes, what were the underlying characteristics of a good leader, that was kind of left for chance. And so part of my role, my gig at J&J and other places has been always to try to define that. And could it be measured? We all get the dreaded performance review.
Yeah, right.
I'm uncertain these days if it's really well done or not. It might be top down, If you really want to do that really well, you'd want to have a sort of a 360 feedback from not only your folks that were senior to you, but also the folks that work with you, because they see you every day. Correct. And they should get a voice on that. That's not always been done, of course, but so I view leadership, if you want to try to measure it, as what's everybody saying? And is there a formalized method to collect that? So some of the things that make for good leaders, and I'm going to read a few things here: integrity and authenticity. You got to be real. And this goes to your point about my going to work at Golf Galaxy and Dick's. I was, at that point, no different than the 17-year-old high school junior learning how to fold a sweatshirt.
Right.
So you have to be authentic and have integrity. And part of that is a leader's word is their bond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay? In the military, you trust each other with your lives. That's not necessarily true in private sector, of course. And I've had a lot of conversation about this with investment bankers, who all are important, of course, and have gone to good schools. And it's like, look, I know you think you've done leadership, but you've not done leadership in the way that I have, where I had men and women's lives at stake. You may have had a profit motive at stake, but I had lives at stake. There's a difference there. Visionary, you got to be visionary. You got to have visionary thinking. You got to look beyond the current, if you're in private sector, the current quarter, and look way ahead. What are we going to do? That's what a leader does. You got to be able to talk about, to articulate that future, and be able to tell that to the people that work with you, your customers, and your suppliers. They need to know what's going on. You got to be resilient and adaptable. Things happen. Look, I came here because my son was ill and died. You have to be able to get on with your life. It's not been easy at times, but you have to be able to absorb setbacks.
It's interesting because resiliency and adaptability are almost different skill sets.
They are. I agree with that.
Right? There's a quit and a grit component to it. There's a discernment that has to happen as to whether the situation has evolved to the extent that I have to adapt.
Correct.
Or the situation has temporarily changed and resiliency is what's required to push through. And so like resiliency and adaptability get listed together, but they're actually
two different
the
things.
Discernment of those two.
Yep.
They're different behaviors in many ways.
And you have to have the experience, I might say, or some people say you got to go with your gut. Well, your gut is a
Sure.
combination of education and experience together to be able to figure that out. And I think that's exactly right. And that always doesn't come early on. You need to have a few hard knocks along the way to figure that
For
out.
sure.
Okay. Another thing that good leaders have to have is emotional intelligence. 10, 15 years ago, there was a great book, the first of many books on emotional intelligence. And I argue that you should read that book and understand what's in it and how do you fit on that. This goes to the 360 thing of how do you score yourself and how do other people score you and how do you build that emotional intelligence.
I'm interested in your thoughts on that. That seems to be definitely an emerging discipline of leadership, especially whether from the outside or you would know from the inside. Military leadership and even corporate leadership of 40 and 50 years ago, emotional intelligence would not probably have been listed.
Correct.
It was far about leverage
Yes.
and execution of authority.
Correct.
And follow the rules. Yep. I'm intrigued and actually appreciate that you bring that in as a leadership style, because I think oftentimes people hear of a career naval officer or a career military officer, and they expect essentially a Warhammer leadership style, a full authoritarian leadership style. From the very beginning of your career, were you a proponent of emotional intelligence, or was that a path for you that you have seen it as a more effective leadership style?
That's interesting you bring it up. So first of all, I think a lot of times, I sometimes am worried when I tell people I was a Navy officer, because then they figure, well, they're a nail and I'm just a bigger hammer, and I'm going to fix that problem. I think as you go down your military career, you figure out pretty quickly the military acts like a corporation. I tell that story a lot. It's a corporation. It has a corporate structure. And there are times, I think that the majority of times you can act with emotional intelligence and you get together with the juniors you're with and you go, hey, here's what we got to do. How do we do it? What do you think? And you work together as a team. That's the effective leader. There are times, though, when I flew an airplane that had a big crew on it. It was a P-3. It was anti-submarine warfare, anti-surface warfare. It carried a lot of offensive weaponry. Didn't carry much for defensive. But there were times there where you couldn't huddle in the airplane to decide something. Holy crap, I'm on fire here. We've got to fix this, and you do this. So it became very directive at that point. And I think people understand that. But the majority of real life, you're not on fire. You're not falling out of the sky. In fact, I use that example with the kids at Dick's. Like, look, are we on fire here? Are we going to crash? We're not. So just sit back and take a look at this. So my journey to that was I learned along the way. I never was real authoritarian to begin with. I think sometimes you're set up or you're built with a certain set of characteristics and attributes. Mm-hmm. And so I wasn't that kind of guy like, I'm going to hammer this nail here. I just never saw that as an effective, smart way to be a leader. So I was predisposed towards that. And only after somebody read the book did I understand, that's emotional intelligence is what I've been practicing anyway. So another key attribute of leadership is decisiveness. There's a lot of times where you can have a group of people and you say, okay, here's what we got to do. How do we do it? What do you think is the best way to do it? What are our resources? Can we get this done? How much time do we have? But at some point then you go, okay, and hopefully, I've always said to people, hopefully you can surround yourself. Everybody in that group that you're surrounded with are smarter than you. You want the smartest people around the table there, smarter than I am. My only job there is to coalesce what we're going to do and then say, okay, decisively, here's what we're going to do and here's how we're going to do it. And you lay that out. I used to tell people, look, I had something called a one-page plan. You could put it in your pocket, and on there was the things we're going to do, the strategy, the tactics, the resources needed, the timeline, who was responsible for what, and you could talk to that, of course. It was a communications vehicle. And does this all fit in with emotional intelligence? It sure does, You have to have the confidence to make a tough call in there sometimes, which then gets back to the emotional intelligence. You have to be curious, and you have to have some humility. Yeah, I had to have a ton of humility showing up at Dick's, as I call it. Correct. Because there I am, and I'm an old guy. And in fact, I purposely not told people there what I've done. Yeah. Because it didn't matter,
Because you want to be treated as everybody else is treated. You want to be one of the people.
Exactly. I'm not there to be anybody's boss, or I'm there to learn a little bit about golf. I'll be selfish and get a little discount, but also to help people that come in. It does no good for me to say, oh, I was somebody at once upon a time, because you know what? Everybody is somebody at some time, but things change over life. And so this is part of this continuous learning that you have to do. To be a good leader, you got to constantly learn. You got to read.
Yeah.
If you put yourself in a little room and lock the door and don't come out, you're ineffective. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
You've got to learn along the way. One of my goals right now is asking all these kids that work at Dick's, hey guys, what are you doing in AI these days? What's going on in AI? As you know, Justin, as we go through life, there are certain things, 20 years ago, 25 years ago is kind of the dot-com bubble. So there's these little events that go along. And so right now I'm trying to get up to speed and keep up to speed about AI. So and I'm asking the kids, because who's better to ask? So there's this continuous learning that leaders have to know. They have to, where they work, they should be out, like as a Navy officer, it's management by walking around. And you got to go out there and walk around and hear what people think and have them educate you along the way. I want to divert for a second and point out there's a difference, in my point of view, of leaders and managers. Certainly. Leaders are what we're talking about. Setting visionary goals, continuous learning, empathetic. You have to take care of your people. Just remember, if you're an officer, your troops eat first. You're last. You are last.
Yeah.
And your job is to remove roadblocks in front of them. That's your job as a leader. I had a guy that I worked with at Johnson & Johnson. He led the South American group, and he was Italian. He goes, oh, Steve, there were two kinds of people, numerators and denominators. Numerators were the leaders. They were setting out, but the managers were the denominators. They were so fixated on cost control and maybe control, period. They were underconfident. They were less visionary. They were too focused on maybe the wrong things at times. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I've read a couple books on the same subject that there are actually companies that promote the denominators more rapidly than the numerators, because the denominators offer a path of greater security, of greater confidence. They're able to say, hey, here's the plan, here's the path, here's the this, and I can do this cost savings. Yep. And when you use an authoritative leadership style, there is a more directly measurable cause and effect between action and reaction. Yep. Some of the higher emotional intelligence, higher leadership, as you and I are defining leadership, the cause and effect isn't as direct. Correct. And it may feel squishier in the boardroom.
Yep.
And so there's a lot of literature around what you and I are talking about with leadership. When times get tough, the CEO is going to lean towards direct and authoritative and prescriptive.
Correct.
Have you seen the same thing in your career?
I have, very much so. So first of all, we're talking about a sense of how do you deal with ambiguity.
Yeah.
Some people are really good at that, and some people are not. And it depends on how they've been, their learning experience along the way, what they've been equipped with, all the stuff that we're talking about, and then their internal attributes of how they come equipped. And so to your point, does the more senior leadership, are they okay with ambiguity? Or are they okay with people who can handle that? Or are they really on the chopping block and they've got to deliver some results today? Now, that's not to say that the leaders that we've been talking about here can't deliver. The good ones can. The good ones can. I chafe if I'm working with someone who's so controlling. That's just not who I am. In my mind, is demeaning to a lot of people.
Sure. I'm very interested. You and I have talked before, and you mentioned that in your time at Johnson & Johnson, one of the roles that you had was to come into business units or come into businesses that had been struggling or that had been recently acquired, and that there was some need to improve them or to get them on the tracks.
Yeah.
And you've already highlighted that you don't use a direct authoritarian approach. I'm super excited that you say that. I was a little nervous about this question interviewing a Navy officer who had been the corporate improvement officer. I was expecting the Warhammer leadership approach, But I'm way more fascinated now in the answer.
Get that hammer out.
How did you approach being an outsider? Because when you come from corporate, you're an outsider.
That's correct.
With the message that we need to make a change.
Yeah.
To an audience that may not believe that we need to make a change, that it's outside circumstances that have led us to this situation.
It's a really good question, and certainly timely with everything that's going on. Everyone faces that. And what's the time frame and constraints and everything? I'm here from corporate and I'm here to help.
That's literally what I wrote on the sheet. That's exactly what I wrote on the sheet.
I was at this extremely successful company, Johnson & Johnson, so nobody was failing there. But the idea was that if you could improve everybody, let's say 10%, in a couple of years, you've jumped them 30%. That was the idea. And 30% of what? Could have been financial, it could have been operational, it could have been new products, it could have been customers. The whole point was going towards the company valuation, of course, what shareholders and earnings per share. So not only was I'm here from corporate and I'm here to help, and I work for the chairman. So, if I wanted to hammer, I could. But you immediately knew that was not the way to approach this. You'd get the proverbial, well, thanks for coming by for lunch. Come back and see us in a year. That was failure. And so not only was I wary that way, I had come straight out of the Navy into this job. Mm-hmm. I really was a newcomer because my peers had all been there for 20, 25 years. They were leading regions or big companies or something. So typically what I tried to do is by influence. I would tell them, hey, here's why I'm here. They all knew why I was here. So what can we work on together that makes sense, that might help us both out? And it wasn't so much me as finding a resonating voice inside these operating companies.
Yes.
Finding a one or two or three people there who could help do the strategic and tactical lift that needed to be done. And so you say, well, how did you decide what to work on? Guys like me had sort of a lens that you could look at, an assessment tool, you might say.
Yeah.
And what is it right or wrong? Yeah, you could argue either way, but it was a starting point. Usually with consensus, okay, this is this emotional intelligence deal again. I'm not here to drive the nail. I'm here to get everybody to help. You could figure out one or two or three things that made sense to work on.
Absolutely. I love your use of the term resonance there, because in the resonance, it's you touch it once and it continues to oscillate. Correct. Because it's at natural frequency.
Yep.
And the approach that you're talking about, and the one that I have seen work over and over again, is rather than requiring submission, saying, here, I'm here on behalf of the company and you're going to do what I say. We may have a meeting where I offer you the opportunity to speak, but at the end of the day, it's going to be what I say. Rather than requiring submission, what you were aiming for is to enable agency.
Correct.
You were coming. There is creativity built inside of an organization. There are people that have had thoughts of how to make these improvements, but either because of the burden of implementation or the busyness of the day or the leadership that they're under, that it's easier to just suppress that idea than it is to execute the idea.
And so you needed to find those people.
Correct.
And as part of it. And realize we're all in this together. And if we make this a win-win, everybody wins. Pick stuff that was achievable, that you could talk to and communicate against or around, that became a resonating story in there. And you can use it. The other thing I'm going to mention is that companies have different cultures, of course. And remember, I was in 100 and some countries here. So every country is different. The cultures are different. You had to very quickly understand where you were in that. Oh, I'm from America. I know best. That's not true. There's some really good ideas out there and some very smart people around the world that are a lot smarter than you and I. They just needed the opportunity to do something. You were giving them, as you just said, agency to do something, and that was very important. And for them to take the credit, not me.
Yep.
I'm just there as a facilitator, Johnson & Johnson was very much a decentralized company.
Okay.
And I use that because people know Johnson & Johnson. They know the brand names, Baby, Neutrogena, AccuView lenses. So it's common household names that people know and value. And that was the point. We have to protect this brand because people like it. The same thing could be said back into the military, into the Navy. The Navy's been around 250 years this year. It has a brand. It needed to protect its image and tradition. And you do that by letting the folks that work for you figure out what they need to do, maybe with some coaching from us, and then they go ahead
Yeah.
and do it because you can't do it
Yeah.
alone. You can't do it alone.
That's
And
right.
you're giving them agency, you might say, to do that.
Yeah. One of the critical components that I've seen is you come into an environment as a leader and you've been delegated, hey, you're the leader of this new situation. One of the critical components of getting from 0 to 1,
Yep.
getting started in that role, is the development of trust
Correct.
between yourself and the team.
Yep.
What were tactical things that you did? What was your approach to build trust early?
Yeah.
With someone who you might actually be starting in a debt position.
What?
Here's a guy from corporate. Here's a guy that was in the Navy. I know what he's going to do. He's going to come in and tell me exactly what to do. And if I don't stand at attention, he's going to go after me.
Yep.
How did you overcome those concerns and build trust quickly with teams?
So that's a really good question. And I think it goes back to each of our own attributes. I wasn't going to walk in there and say, literally, as we just said, I'm here from corporate. I'm here to help. That's a non-starter. They
Yes.
knew why I was there. They knew where I was coming from. I didn't have to even talk about that, and I didn't. I thought that was a death knell. It was more about, hey guys, here's our assignment. How do we work this together? And really, I wanted them to take responsibility for it, not me. I was just there to take the roadblocks away from in front of them. In other words, I was in a sense an enabler. I was building their confidence. I was going to be their coach. I was going to instill within them the authority to do what they needed to do that they may not have felt before. It's a mix of all those things. I wasn't just dealing in one operating company. I was dealing with hundreds.
Correct.
And so
Correct.
it changed, which is back to my point about what were those companies doing? Well, they're all trying to make money, of course, but what were their products? Who were their customers? What country were you in? How did that country work? How was the culture there? It's very different being in Japan than it is, say, in Germany. You needed to be tender to that and work with that. And sometimes it's like, hey, guys, here's what we got to do, but I'm not certain how to do it. What are we going to do? You wanted them on your side. Does that make sense?
Yes.
You didn't have to stand out there in front with your sword up and go, let's take that hill. That was crazy.
Sometimes you find yourself alone running up that hill when you lead that way.
You needed to be seen, of course, but you didn't need to be there. They were all smart people. And I remember my friends and I had this little aerospace company. It made components, metal manufacturing, fabrication in Iowa. And they used to say, oh my goodness, the admirals are here. And in fact, we hadn't been there more than a couple of weeks, and pretty soon we had Senator Chuck Grassley coming to visit us because it was a small town. And they all were like, what are all you guys doing here? But we didn't make that play with the people that work for us. We just said, hey, we need to clean these places up a little bit. That's all we had to say. They knew what to do.
Yeah.
We'll get some better lighting in here. We need to work on customers and customer concentration. They knew that inherently anyway. You were telling them what they already knew. You just needed to give them the authority to do what they needed to do.
Yeah. Yeah. What advice are you passing to the young people that you work with at Dick's about leadership? They're not in an explicit leadership role.
Yep.
They may not even know if they want to become a leader. They're still figuring out what life is. What are the pieces of advice? What are the nuggets that you're giving to the next generation to prepare them to be good leaders?
You're exactly correct on all that, because remember, these are 18 to 25-year-olds. The quickest way to get off on the wrong foot is to go in there and start preaching something and be like some old codger. And then you'll start getting the eye rolls, or they'll just walk away from you. That's not the point. And trust me, that's how that could go. I practice leadership by walking around. And probably some days the people that actually work for are probably like, well, they get it. They know I've got a little history, and so I'm not worried about that. So I walk around, and I don't get to everybody every day. You don't have to, but I get to a few and go, hey, what's going on? What's going on at school? Try to get them to talk to me about what's going on in their lives and what are they doing. And from there, you can discern, to use that term you brought up earlier, to discern, what are they struggling with, or how can you help them? They may not tell you. In fact, they probably won't tell you. I'm there to give them support. If you go back to all these things I talked about, it's talking to them. We talk about some store stuff. We talk about their private outside work, what's going on there. Sometimes they'll ask me for advice, not very often, but sometimes they do. What I often usually tell them, remember, these are formative years. I say, look, you got to stay in school. I know you're here working, but you've got to stay in school, whether they're going to a community college, which I think is a great route these days because it's affordable. You've got to keep going in that continuous learning thing, and to be able to think about what are you going to do for not just a job, but a career, and that
Yeah.
you're going to have many jobs and many, many careers in your life. So you have to be this continuous learner to be able to be ready for that along your journey.
It's funny you mentioned walking around. I worked early in my career for what I would say is an authoritarian leader, the type of guy that took roll call in the office at 5:00 on Friday just to make sure that nobody was cheating the company. And I joined the group and didn't really know the culture of the group to be this authoritarian style. And in my first one-on-one, I was actually chided for not being at my desk, for walking around. And literally, it's sending emails to people that are 50 yards from you. I was the type of person that's like, I'm going to go have a human interaction with this person. I'm going to connect with this person. I'm going to tailor the communication to help inspire them and to get feedback from them. And in that authoritarian environment, it was just wasteful. It was not following the rules. It's funny you mentioned walking around. That's definitely my leadership approach. If you're in the wrong organization, you can get corrected for that.
That's right.
If you're not careful.
And those are going to happen. Those are out there. You've got to kind of do your homework, if you can, before you join organizations, because you need to know enough about yourself to know how you need to fit in somewhere. Because if you're the long nail, you're going to get pounded down. And
and early in your career, for me personally, early in my career, I didn't know who I was. And it was actually those events that were formative in learning who I was and what were the organizations that I would fit in.
And that's part of the conversation I have with these kids. We talk about the organization they're in there, the Dick's organization, and how that works. How do they get along in school? How are they balancing school with work and their families? Part of that's just basic leadership to help these kids get down the road of life. That should be everyone's job, of course. Not to the point of being overbearing and then getting the eye rolls, of course. You got to know when to step back.
That's right. The last question I have for you, Steve, it's somewhat of a personal question, but it's one that I'm fascinated for people that are willing to open the door and show others into their life. You've been in the military. As you said, you've worked in 100 countries. You've been an executive. You also list on your resume that you've been married to Susan for 45 years.
48 years. That's
48.
Yeah.
You say more than 45.
Yeah.
So for 48 years. There's a lot of executives that can't say that. There's a lot of people in the military that can't say that.
Yeah.
For you and for Susan, what are the components of your marriage that have allowed it to work and allowed it to thrive? And the pithy version of the question is, what's the secret to a long marriage?
Yeah.
But it is to say your marriage stands in the face of the odds.
That's true.
I'm interested for you to share insights and your experience because I'm very intrigued by
I
that.
have to be very careful. She could be on the other side of this door right now.
Well, she's actually the next guest on Grody and Unprofessional. We're going to hear the real version of the story in the next episode.
There you go, the real truthful version. Exactly.
Right.
There's a lot of humor in that. It goes back to the basics for leadership. This commitment. We've taken a commitment. You need to be authentic. You need to listen to each other. I get schooled every day. I'm still learning. Ask anybody who's been married a long time, they'll tell you that too, And, there's a sharing that goes on. Look, I'm the chef at my house. I'm the grocery buyer at my house. We take on mutual duties, Life is a journey, and it can be pretty tasking and trying and hard at times,
Yeah.
I mean, just getting through the death of our only child we're not through it, of course, but you never will.
Certainly.
But it was pretty darn hard. And remember, I'm a guy who was deployed 8 times. I would fly over the horizon and be gone. And that was before the days of internet and mobile phones. So communication was via letter, and it could take a week or 2 weeks. So you had to build trust in each other. I'm not saying that hasn't been broken at times. We all fall down at times. It's the ability to be kind to each other, to help each other, to support each other. That's all part of being married. And it's not my way or the highway. It's just like we talked about before. You're the subservient leader. You're there to help each other. There's no task that's too low or belittling, that it all has to get done. Floors have to get cleaned. And, but Susan and I barely knew each other. And I thought to myself, she is so good looking. I have to get this woman under contract, And the guys in my squadron are going, Roach, how in the hell did you pull that off? I think we were lucky. We were lucky in that we each had been raised with certain standards and values. Maybe success is because we managed to find each other and we had a similar set of values. It could be very difficult if 2 people believed wildly different things. I don't know. That could be very hard. But we were lucky. And we were a little older, we weren't 20 years old. We were older. So I think we came to the table with similar values and similar ideas, and we've built on that over the years. Marriages sometimes fail in the military because you're gone a lot.
Yes.
I think maybe ours flourished because we were both independent people. Miss Susan was I call her Miss Susan. She could handle that fine. Not many people can. So there was a lot of things that came to the mix, not that far off of all these things that we talked about under leadership.
Certainly.
It fits together. I'm still the lowest ranking employee here. And so.
You're not the ranking officer in your home, is that right?
No, that ship never sailed.
Steve, this has been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed getting to know you and getting to hear your perspective. I think there is a lot of rumors and a lot of predispositions of what it looks like to lead in the military.
Yeah.
And what military leaders, when they come into corporate America, look like and how they behave and how they act. I've really appreciated your perspective that the same approach, which is seeking agency for people, supporting people, looking for common ground in which we can work together. You've seen that leadership style can operate and can work well in multiple domains, whether it's at Dick's Sporting Goods, whether it's in the boardroom at Johnson & Johnson, or whether it's on the flight deck of an aircraft carrier. That same approach has the ability to work.
I want to mention one thing. I think you have to have the inner confidence to know that will work.
Yes.
That'll be okay. And if people ask you or challenge you, it's fine. Let them do that, and it's just fine. It's
correct.
How everyone grows. To kind of get back to the authoritarian leadership, the people that don't have that confidence live on that authoritarian scale somehow,
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it is more of an elementary leadership style than an advanced leadership style because it feels like you're in control.
Yep.
It feels like there is a more direct cause and effect. And it feels like if it goes sideways, I did everything I could do to prevent it from going sideways.
It's a CYA attribute.
Correct.
Hey, Justin, I've truly enjoyed this. And if I can help you or your listeners somehow, it's a pay forward deal.
Yeah. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you, Steve?
Yeah. It's Steve dot, my last name, Roehrich, ROEHRICH @gmail.com. So it's
excellent.
Steve.Roehrich@gmail.com.
Steve, you have a great day.
You too, Justin.
Yes, thank you. For those that wish to share praise, feedback, accolades, or large sums of money, you can reach me at justin@grody.io. For those with complaints, concerns, frustrations, or accusations, feel free to express those concerns to my friend Steve. As a former pilot, I think he would appreciate if you hired a skywriter as the means of communication. But remember, it could cost you a discount on golf clubs. So skywrite carefully. Thanks for your time. Let's do this again soon.